All right. This is just a test stream. I'm trying to figure my OBS scenes. I'm going to try to figure out I want things set up, and I want to make sure that all of this goes pretty smoothly for the stream on Monday, where we're going to be kind of covering a lot of really, hopefully, interesting things in Python. I'm going to use OBS to record this in addition to broadcasting on YouTube, because I do want to make sure that I'm going to capture this, because I actually don't know if, as I'm streaming, that this is going to work out well. Because this is the very first time I'm attempting to stream on YouTube. I might tweet about this. Let's see. So, let's see here. Okay, I'll post this. Okay, so I'm gonna minimize this. All right, let me make sure I can see. In case anybody drops in, I do want to see the chat, so I can see that here. All right. This is a test. Cool. All right. So I see there may or may not be a viewer. That might be me. I don't know. But if somebody's out there, hi. This is going to be mostly just making sure that the video settings are working properly. I have scenes properly set up in OBS, and make sure that I have the software that I'm actually going to need to do this stream. So this might be kind of boring, but I'm going to adjust things as we go. This is obviously a reasonable talking head setup. It's just my video. I will probably be setting up this screen, the green screen, to make it a little bit easier so I'm not dominating the picture quite as much as I am right now. But the next thing that I'm going to want to set up, I think, is a full screen capture. So let's see here. I'll just do a display capture, and actually let me create a new scene, and I think that can be a duplicate of this one. Let's see, it's not what I meant to do. Let's see, remove that. Yes, okay. So I think duplicate here, we'll call this scene desktop, and I think for this one I will make myself a little bit smaller here. Then I'll add a capture for my display, and I'll call this display capture. That's fine. And this should be my this display here. Okay. And let's go ahead and move that above that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, now it should be pretty easy to see what I'm doing on the desktop. Ooh, I was clipping right there. Okay, that's fine. Now, let's... one of the things that I need to do, because I had some issues with it on this computer, is I need to reinstall Anaconda. And Anaconda is the Python distribution that I've been using. That I like to teach with, because it has all of the packages I like to use for all of the data analysis that I do. So whether this is natural language processing or statistical analyses, machine learning, Anaconda is really nice because it does come with a really big selection of libraries. So you don't need to be installing a bunch of extra things just as you go, although that is admittedly a pretty good way of going about it. So what I'm going to do here, I already completely uninstalled Anaconda from this computer, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab it, and I'll make a new window here. And here, there's actually a really cool plugin for Chrome that grabs images from an API server that, or excuse me, a triple IF server that shows you a lot of really cool things. That it's neither here nor there. But I'm going to go to anaconda.com. I'm just going to go ahead and grab the individual edition. I'm going to download this. And I'm on Windows here. I do have a Mac and a really cheap little capture card that I set up that I might also be using for part of this stream that will, so I can show people how to do all of these things on a Mac computer as well as on a Windows computer. But I'm going to be installing the Windows Python 3.8 version. It doesn't actually look like they have the 2.7 versions anymore, which is great. 2.7 is not supported anymore. It's not something that you should really be using. But for the workshop that I'm going to be giving on Monday, it's really critical to use Python 3. And this has a lot to do with how Python handles strings these days, because back in the day, the default way that Python handled strings, which is a data type in Python that represents language, it uses bitcode or bytecode, and it didn't contain the character encodings in the way that makes it easy for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Python 3.8, 64-bit. This will depend on your Windows or your Mac distribution. In this day and age, I think almost everybody ought to be over here on 64-bit. I'm just going to download this and install it with all of the default settings. Now, when you're working on a Windows computer, one of the important things that you'll have to do is you'll have to tell your system where Anaconda is living. But if you install it and accept all of the default settings, it will install an Anaconda shell that will just immediately know where Anaconda is, and it'll be all good. My hope here is that the stream is going to look good. I'm going to go back, hopefully, and take a look at it and make sure that it does look good. But if anybody does drop in, feel free to say hi in the chat and let me know, is the bitrate good? Is it bad? How the audio is sounding? I'm going to keep an eye on my audio levels because I think I'm peaking a little bit. So I'm going to adjust my gain, just very slightly turn it down a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and install Anaconda. And I think this is a decent scene, I think, for just my general desktop. I might capture individually the windows that we're going to need, but I think this is fine for now. So I'm just going to install this for me. It is a pretty big install. It's 2.7 gigabytes required. So if you're on kind of an older machine, this might be a little bit of a concern. But because I have plenty of space on this computer, it's not really that big of an issue. And so you can mess around with these advanced options if you want. It's not really necessary. I just tend to go with the default options here, and I go ahead and run with it. So this will install. It'll only take a second. The other thing that we really need for actually doing the coding that we're going to be doing is a plain text editor. Now, Anaconda comes with a few different options that make this pretty easy. I really like to use VS Code or Virtual Studio Code. I do think there is a direct link from inside Anaconda that will let you install this, but there are other options. There's Notepad++, there is Sublime Text, there's Spider. You can go like a full-blown IDE and do something like RStudio. That's a good option because that's also compatible with Python. But I'm just going to do, when I'm teaching this, really plain text. We're going bare bones, and I'm going to kind of walk through the really basic things that are involved in programming, right? This is going to be a pretty, hopefully, chill experience, and we're not going to get into really very many advanced things, but I think we are going to have an opportunity to talk about, really basic programming constructs. We're going to be able to talk about really basic text analysis, doing kind of word counting and searching and these sorts of things. And I think there ought to be plenty of time to do that. Now, the materials I think we're going to have time to cover are things that I would cover in maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks of the class that I teach. So some of this might be rushed, but we're going to kind of see, because my hope is to spend the first hour of each of these sessions going through things, explaining them, and use the second hour either to push it a little bit further or to just answer questions. And this will kind of depend on whether or not anybody joins in. And my hope is a few people will, but if nobody does, this is also something that I'm recording. It will go up on the channel, and I'm hoping to show students who might want to work with me on digital humanities projects that this is something that's not that difficult to do. You can do it with pretty basic training, and I don't think it's that difficult. So I'm pretty excited. I think it'll be a useful stream for a lot of people. Now, of course, there are all sorts of resources that are out there that you can use to get started yourself, where you don't really need something like this, right? There's YouTube videos. I mean, I have on my channel a lot of videos that cover some of the same things that we're going to be talking about. There are textbooks. There's a really spectacular Python data analysis, digital humanities textbooks that just came out recently, open access. There is a new textbook that came out that's like a cookbook for Python projects. A lot of really cool stuff. I think I will put some of these links in the description so you can have access to them, and know that there are all sorts of resources out there that you can use to learn how to do all this stuff. This is taking a little while, but that's okay. I'm mostly just gonna chill, and when I post this to YouTube as a VOD, I'm probably gonna cut out any of the the pauses we have, but it's not that critical. So the other thing I could do is I can start setting up maybe a few others of the scenes that I might want. The sound is entirely to the left side. Oh, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so let me grab, let's see. Yeah, that is something I can set. And by default, I think it expects my microphone to be dual channel, but it's not. Let's see if I can do. Okay. There we go. So this is a mono source. Close. Hopefully, is that any better? I think so. Now I'm seeing both channels have signal, so hopefully that will be that'll fix that. The all right, Anaconda is still installing. Awesome. Okay, so the other thing, I might also be a little dark. I have a light here. Turn this on. That is a little bright. That's a little too bright. I'm gonna turn on my overhead light. Okay. Make sure. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so that's a little bit better. All right, so Anaconda has finished installing. Next, finish. Okay. So now that Anaconda has finished installing, you think it's fine without the extra light? Okay, so I'll turn that off. That'll kind of change because it's a little dark here today because we've got a lot of rain outside the window. So perhaps we'll kind of, well, now I'm in the dark again because it sort of adjusted itself. But that's all good. Okay, so we were looking at the Anaconda installation. So once Anaconda installs on a Windows computer, it's going to install something called the Anaconda Navigator. So if you go into your start menu, Anaconda, it will come up with this navigator. So if you open the navigator, inside this navigator, there's going to be a few different things you can install that are extra, right? One of the things we can install is, a plain text editor, which we're going to need to have for for this tutorial workshop. I've already got it installed here. It's this, I guess my video is kind of covering it, but it's VS Code. Yeah, so you should have something that looks like this. If you're on a Windows machine, you're going to see you have a command prompt. You have actually a few extra things from the last time I installed this. Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Notebooks are actually really great platforms for learning how to code on, and a lot of people like to teach with them. I'm not going to be using them just because I kind of prefer the experience of working with the raw Python files and having kind of a memoryless state for my Python scripts. Because one of the cool things about Jupyter Notebooks is you can mix code with natural language, and you can run these little boxes, these little chunks of code all at a time, and it will kind of remember the state of each of these boxes. But for me, because I'm not super organized, I lose track of which ones I've ran, and I can kind of forget what's going on. So I'm gonna, I think, avoid those for this particular class. Instead, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna be writing just plain text files. And so when you open up this Navigator, you have a lot of different options. And if you don't have it installed, this VS Code is going to be here, and this button will say install, like it does here for GlueViz. They also have RStudio and a lot of other things. So you can launch it or install it, and it will start up your plain text editor. I have a bunch of old code that I was working on. Let me close this. Do I want to save this? Yeah, I think I do. Close this. Save that. Okay. Actually, I don't think I need to save this. Cancel. I'll save. Okay. Okay. Close all this stuff. Demo. I realize you can't see this. This is not on the stream yet. Save that. Close that. Save that. Okay. So when you launch or after you've installed Visual Studio Code, it's just going to open something up like this. It might open a window up that has a file ready to go. But we can just start a new file and then start typing. Hello. So, and I'll explain this in the actual tutorial because this is going to be an important thing to deal with. This is just text that doesn't really have any extra formatting. So if you work with, say, a Microsoft doc file, that's actually an XML file with a whole bunch of extra markup that tells the word processor how do you display this. I'm not going to do that here. We're just going to use these plain text files, and all we really need to do is just save these to disk as .py files. So I'm just going to my desktop, I can say test.py, or let's just say demo script 1.py, and then we can start typing, Python. You just start print hello. Okay, so that's fine. What might one need to know? Oh, the other thing you'd need to know is how to actually run these scripts. And this is one of the reasons why we're going to be getting a lot into the command line on Monday, because if you're not using something like Jupyter Notebooks, you will need to become familiar with how your computer structures files and how to interact with them from the command line. Now, if you use Anaconda on a Windows machine, you will either need to tell the system where you've installed Anaconda. You can add it to your path, your environment variables. That's all fine. Another option, though, is when we look at this Navigator, you can see that there is the command exe prompt. If you launch this, this is actually just the Windows command prompt, except it's loaded with environment variables that tell it where Anaconda lives. And so I like to use this just because it's easy. I don't need to deal with environment variables. I can just kind of dive straight in. So that is a good option. So it actually looks like things are are going fairly well. Like the video quality seems okay, audio quality seems fine. What else might cause issues next time? So let me maybe adjust myself. I don't need to be this big, I think. We'll play around with this. And like I say, I'll actually use the green screen so I'm not taking up so much of the screen, because it's not particularly useful. To give you a quick preview of what we're going to cover, I'm going to sit down and, of course, make all of this fairly in-depth prior to actually doing it. But I think the plan is going to be something like, we'll start with we'll do software and installation. We're going to do the command prompt. And I think we'll talk about, navigating, listing files. We'll talk about deleting files. That's not how you spell delete. Well, I'm a very poor speller, and I think that will come through quite a bit here. Deleting files and directories, executing Python. We'll talk a little bit about sudo versus or administrator. So there are only a few things we really need to know about the command prompt. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about why you need to be careful when you're in the command prompt, because don't just blindly copy sudo instructions from the internet, particularly if they might be including things that involve removing files, because one thing to remember when you're working with this is that it's not going to ask you, do you really want to do this in most cases? It's just going to go ahead and do it. But we'll talk about that on Monday. Then, of course, we'll talk about super basic Python. We'll talk about integers, floats, booleans, strings, which are really going to be the ones that we're going to spend the most time on here in this particular workshop, because we're going to be dealing a lot with language, right? And related to that, we're going to use lists, dictionaries. We're also going to talk about loops, Boolean instructions, like we'll just say if, elif, else stuff. Then we're going to talk about very, very basic text processing. So let's see, loading in files, cleaning, let's see, tokenizing. And here, when we talk about tokenization, this is going to be something that's going to vary depending on the language we use, right? And I do want to spend a little bit of time in this boot camp, which is what I guess what I'm calling it, kind of talking about the affordances of different language, because I myself work mostly with Chinese materials, and the way you would process a document that's written in Chinese is really pretty different than how you would deal with it in English, right? So, some of the things you would do with an English text, things like lemmatization, or stemming, other things. Those are, I guess, kind of the big ones. I guess these are technically distinct from tokenization. So let's just say text processing. And so tokenization, English is pretty easy. I mean, it's more complicated than splitting along white space. So, in English, generally speaking, words are distinguished by white space. That's not the case in Chinese, where you don't have morphological things in the text to tell you where a word begins and ends, right? So, particularly when you work with classical Chinese, this becomes a pretty difficult problem, where the grammar can vary pretty extensively depending on the period in which it was written. Sometimes things are actually intentionally ambiguous. So, telling the computer how to do this it can be tough. And the key, I think, to emphasize here as I go through this boot camp is that the computer is going to be doing pretty much exactly what we tell it to do. And that means we have to be extremely explicit because it is dumb in a lot of ways. There's kind of this traditional exercise that you see in your first year CS class where a student will be called up by the instructor and they'll be like, okay, well, tell me how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And, it's usually, the idea is that you have to specify every last thing, and I'm terrible at this because I can't even think of all the steps. So you put your hand on the closet door, you open it, you get out the bread, the sack of bread, you untie the zip tie, you reach in, you pull out a piece of bread, and then you put peanut butter on it. But if you're a computer, you also need to get out the jar of peanut butter and unscrew the cap and pick up a knife and put the knife in. And point being is you have to be extremely explicit. And so one of the things that I like to do in teaching these sorts of workshops is doing it in a few different ways. So usually what I'll do is I'll start by kind of walking through a pure Python way to do it. So, we're going to use basic Python functions to split apart an English sentence, right? So we might use, the split method on a string using space, right? That's easy enough. But of course, there are actually much more sophisticated ways we could do this using other libraries. So we'll be talking about, let's just say string split, or we'll use an NLT tokenizer and maybe spacey. I haven't decided quite how I want to approach this yet because NLTK is starting to show its age a little bit these days. And so slightly more modern natural language processing tools, it's useful to get into them. But, the goal of this thing is not necessarily to show you here's the state-of-the-art way to do it. It's to kind of give you the tools to figure out how to do it on your own, right? So it should be fun, and hopefully it'll open up a lot of doors for exploration. But yeah, that's kind of what my hope is. So we'll talk about spacey. So here's where I actually need to be paying attention to what you're all seeing on the stream because I can actually see that I am blocking a little bit of what I'm writing. Okay. And here we'll say, let's get into text analysis here. Cleaning, tokenizing, text processing, searching, and viz. Right? So this is kind of basically what we'll be covering in this workshop. And so I figure this will probably be the first day. I'm not sure we're going to get beyond the command prompt because an hour, it's not a lot of time. I've already been talking for maybe not quite half an hour now, and I'm just kind of, going stream of consciousness at the moment. But this is a good plan. Here we're going to talk about integers, floats, Boolean, strings, lists, dictionaries, loops, and we'll just say Boolean operators and if, and we'll say kind of data types. And we're going to hopefully build something pretty cool. Now, for anybody who actually has experience with Python, this is not necessarily going to be, super useful, but it will be hopefully useful for those who've never really worked with a programming language before. I think that's actually probably going to do it. Pretty quick test stream. I might set up a few more scenes, and I'm going to perhaps make sure I can set it up so I can see my laptop. And in fact, I'll actually run and grab that laptop, and that way I can make sure this works. So I'm going to just be right back because I think it's downstairs. So be right back. Grabbing laptop. I realize this is probably a streaming faux pas, but that's okay. I'm going to step away from the computer just very, very quickly. Okay. Actually, I don't have enough to hook this up, so I need to do a little bit better planning. Well. Okay, well, that's fine. Okay, so I think I'm going to call it good for now. I've been streaming for actually 31 minutes already, so we'll cut it there. I talked to Shannon. She says the audio sounds good. Hopefully, so I'm streaming at 1098 or 1080p, and I think that ought to be fine. I think 720 might also work, but I want to make sure the text is as crisp as I can get it. I will be showing the text pretty big, maybe not quite this big, but just to make sure that people can really read it. And so thanks to everybody who stopped by and checked it out. And hopefully I'll see some folks on Monday. I think this will be really exciting. I think it'll be useful for people. And yeah, it'll be kind of a new experience because this is never something that I've done either. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you on Monday.